I work on oceans and fisheries at the Pew Foundation, and I've been working for about 10 years on different environmental issues, on forests, rivers, oceans, and wilderness. So I had a chance to do a lot of work around the country. My background, actually, I have a master's in public policy. So the Nicholas School, some of your faculty are some of the absolute top experts in the world. So I won't be able to, Dr. Orbach among them. And so I can't speak with that level of expertise about the biology, although I'll do my best in the presentation. But I can talk a lot about the policy, how these decisions are made both regionally and in Washington, D.C., and I'll try and give you a pretty good overview. This is a general presentation that we give. I actually wrote it, so about 11 people are giving it around the country right now. But I could tell you about each picture and each fact, and I did all that. Let's see, what was I going to say? So I'll try and keep it to about 30 minutes, so we have a lot of time afterwards for people to ask questions. I want it to be somewhat of a brief presentation, and I welcome any questions. I guess that's it. If I think of something else, I'll do it. And the goal of my presentation, I should add, is to enlist your help. You, your groups, your professors, and people that you know, because it's actually a really, really important time and a real opportunity to shape the future of fish in the oceans. And I'll explain that more later. So, again, it's a general presentation, but I'll try and have it be a little bit more specific. Of you here, how many of you actually are in the fisheries program or AFS or study science or ecology? Okay, that's just about everyone. All right, then I'll do a highest common denominator presentation. Okay, so from space, you see Earth is a blue planet. About 70% of the Earth's surface is oceans. This is North America. We actually have about 4.5 million miles of coastline. And then, of course, oceans actually produce more oxygen than all the forests in the world. These are, again, things you studied. They actually are putting off the harmful effects of global warming by securing carbon dioxide. But obviously, it's just a big pond, and so the mercury pollution and, of course, carbon adds up, and the fish are breathing it, and other species. So both the temperature, the thermohaline circulation of currents, temperature, as well as salinity have a huge effect on the fish. I'll just add one fact, and I'll come back to this later, but earlier this year, actually in 2008, UNEP released a report that concluded that climate change, overfishing, and pollution could absolutely collapse the world's fisheries within decades. So I'll go more explain that a little bit. I mention that, I'm sorry, because often it's said that it's often said in some of the meetings that I go to that because of climate change and other things, we shouldn't be as hard on fishing restrictions. But I think it's quite the opposite. There are so many other threats to fish that we need to be more conservative. It's very likely life on Earth began in the ocean, maybe even something like this brain coral. Under the ocean, there are actually some of the most beautiful and pristine wilderness in the world. You see the seagrass, kelp beds, and mangroves. I guess if you're in the fisheries program, probably a lot of you, I know Lisa, who I spoke with, and Dr. Orbach definitely is spending a lot of time in these beautiful places. Tens of thousands of identified species of fish have evolved over millions of years into some of the most beautiful and spectacular, and this is why I'm having you look at the picture, creatures that you'll ever see. Let's see. The fish in all their diverse forms are essential to the interconnected cycle of marine life, often referred to as a food web. Every species depends on each other to exist. This is something for certain you've studied. Fish feed on algae, microscopic phytoplankton, and each other. And the fish in turn provide food for marine mammals like these seals. Millions of birds and their epic migrations between the continents and across oceans. And spinner dolphins and other cetaceans like the ones that you probably see on North Carolina coastline quite often. Let's see. Clownfish, made famous by, of course, by Finding Nemo, they actually have this really amazing relationship with sea anemone that I'm not going to go into, except to say that the mutualism involves. Actually, the clownfish do get stung at first, but then they do a dance between the anemone and they get to know each other, and then for the rest of their lives, they don't get stung. So it's kind of an interesting story, as is, of course, the story of manta rays and remores in mutualism. And then, of course, fish waste and remains provide food for benthic life, like crabs, conch, lobsters, and, of course, starfish. So for these and many other reasons, fish are a critical indicator of the ocean life, and they really indicate the health of the entire ocean ecosystem. And I'll go back if anyone wants to know which kind of fish, any of that. I'd be happy to do it. Oceans and fish are important to us. More than half the world's population lives within 30 miles of a coastline. And ocean fish feed billions of people, and they're the most popular place for people to go for vacation and recreation. Commercial fishing helped build the United States, and it remains essential to our economy. And recreational fishing is a pastime that provides pleasure to millions of people. The total national value of, and I'm going to give everyone this presentation, Lisa asked for it, so if you want these facts and citations, I'd be happy to share it with you. But the total value of commercial recreational fishing in the U.S. exceeds $48 billion each year. And in 2006, fishermen in North Carolina Ocean Territory caught 95 million pounds of fish, and it's actually estimated $1 billion a year, both between the fishing industry just in North Carolina alone. Unfortunately, fish are disappearing at an alarming rate. In 2007, UNFAO estimated that 75%, or 3/4 of the world's major fisheries, were fully exploited, overexploited, or depleted. In April 2007, some of you might have seen this, National Geographic did an issue that focused on the collapse of oceans and fisheries, in particular highlighting bluefin tuna, which is a really powerful story I'll come back to later. And it really exposed how high-tech fishing methods, greed, and wasteful management have really brought the world's fisheries to dangerous lows. A study printed in the scientific journal Nature, and this is one that I think actually some of your faculty contributed to, found that 90% of the big predator fish in the world's oceans have disappeared in just the last 50 years. That includes fish like swordfish in this picture, sharks, marlin, and tuna. Oh, okay, so I'm going to try and make this work. Okay, this is an animation that actually goes back to that study. Sorry about the background, but I'll give it a quick. This is actually the data that was from the study, and we created an animation to show it. What this is it's made of a lot of information, but the heart of this research was Japanese longlining data. It's a particular fishing technology I'll come back to later, but they have taken detailed records of how many fish they catch per hook that they put out, and they've done it since 1950, and that's where some of this information came from. In the image, you're going to see the more yellow it is, the more fish they're catching. The more red it is, the less fish they're catching. The less fish they're catching. And you can watch it over time, and what you'll see is fishing at effort expand over the world's oceans, and then they're catching less and less fish. Okay. We have that on our website, so if you wanted to have your time to look at it. Okay. Fish are an essential part of the global economy. 2.6 billion people depend on fish for protein around the world. As we move to healthier diets, fish consumption has increased. Americans actually eat more than 4 million pounds of seafood every year. That's a lot of fish and shellfish. And this Seattle seafood market, if you look in the back, they can actually now ship and refrigerate and ship fish around the country within 48 hours. It's really become global. Seafood markets, like this one in Tokyo, Japan, are going to the far reaches of the earth to catch the most precious fish. In this case, they have bluefin tuna that they flash freeze in places like Australia and the U.S. They freeze it literally the second it gets on the boat and then ship it overnight. And a single fish, a single bluefin tuna, can go for $100,000 on the Japanese market, going mainly to sushi. So you can imagine it's very hard to promote conservation in that context. And there was actually another science study that predicted that if we don't change the overfishing and the cumulative effects of other things, that there will be collapse of seafood by 2048. And some of the contributors to that were Boris Worm and Rand Myers, if you guys are familiar with their work. So overfishing, in this case, and in the U.S., it's defined as catching more fish than naturally replaced. Overfishing, it's the U.S. government, it's really their job to manage and restore ocean life. They protect those resources for us. And right now, the global fishing fleet is capable of catching 2.5 times all the fish in the ocean. That's what's been estimated by UN. So it really is a matter of control at this point, both in the U.S. and around the world, and smart management. And so for that reason, I'm actually going to go into a little bit of detail about some of the fishing technologies. Lisa said that some of you might have been on some of these boats, but some might not. Purse seiners is the first technology I want to talk about. Purse seiners they tend to catch fish closer to the surface. This one's in American Samoa, and this one sets on tuna. You can see the home of Charlie and the tuna, where it is. This is actually where this purse seine net's been deployed. They're often a mile long, 2 football fields or 600 feet deep. These are gigantic nets that they're dropping. And they're mainly catching finfish at the top, tuna, swordfish. Those tend to be the targets. The nets encircle and envelop the fish like a giant purse, leaving few to replace those that are taken. This single net holds millions of jack mackerel. That's a person in the bottom left there. Once the fish are netted, they're literally vacuumed onto the ship. The menhaden you see processed in these next two pictures don't even end up feeding people, if you're familiar with Chesapeake Bay. But actually in North Carolina they used to have the last commercial menhaden fishery just shut down last year, and out of Beaufort, because they overfished them. But they actually don't go to food. They go for low value products like fertilizer, cat food, and pretty much any product where it says omega protein or omega 3 and it's like fish oil. That's usually menhaden. Sometimes they end up just rotting like the ones on this deck. So this is actually another technology of trawlers. This big of a boat it's off Alaska, but typically it goes in international waters. This is a Greenpeace photo, but I just wanted to give you a concept of how big they can be. Imagine a typical New England day, a school of millions of herring shimmers at the ocean surface, 200-foot wide, 100-foot long mid-water trawlers, which is what you're looking at in this picture, surround the school and drop a net more than a football field in length. Before the fish or anything living around them, like this whale, are aware, they are sucked up in this net and brought on board. To give you an idea of how big these are, that's actually a whale watching boat in New England. Now, if you've ever been on a whale watching boat, they're actually pretty big, and you can see they're dwarfed by these trawlers. It would really ruin my day if I was going whale watching and saw that. This is a large mid-water trawler. That's actually a man in the middle, if you look really closely, to give you a sense of scale. And these are all ones that are actually operating off the coast of New England that you're looking at, mainly targeting herring, Atlantic herring. Okay. They're equipped with advanced tracking systems, powerful lights, and refrigerated systems, and some of these trawlers are now able to fish 24 hours nonstop. Okay. They're capable of processing billions of fish while still at sea, is the idea. And this is a bottom trawler. I'm not going to go too much into it, but they go along the ocean floor, and their problem is not only, and this is a problem off the coast of North Carolina, but then they're not only killing, of course, the fish or catching the fish, but it also has impacts for the ocean floor as it drags across corals and other benthic life. Okay, so this is to show you bottom trawling. I think this footage is more powerful, if I can get it to work, than anything I can say about it. That worked earlier. This is not my day for technology. I apologize.
It's blank, right?
Well, no. I mean, it's black. Oh, you're seeing it.
Sorry, yeah.
Okay. So these are gorgonians and some of the most diverse coral. This is off the Aleutians in Alaska. And this is from 2002, but this gives you a sense of, this is actually recently discovered, a lot of these seamounts and bottom floor habitats, especially in cold waters. And this is before. This is after. A lot of times what's left by bottom trawler is like a clear cut, except it takes centuries, not decades, to grow back. I mean, coral are very long-lived organisms. Another widespread technique is the use of long lines. You saw famous in the movie with the Andrea Gale, The Perfect Storm. As in this movie, longliners are going farther and farther out to get and taking greater risks with storms and otherwise to catch the big fish like swordfish that they were targeting. This is again an American Samoa, but this is a longliner, and leaving port they may seem somewhat small, but under the ocean they have a huge impact. They can release, what they do is they release powerful fishing lines made of monofilament or steel cable, and they can stretch for up to 80 miles. Some carry up to 10,000 hooks. They're baited with other marine life, so you can imagine that has its impacts. And they're mainly set to target large predator fish like tuna and swordfish as well. But miles of baited lines catch more than just their target fish. They catch anything that takes the bait. So you can see the swordfish in the background there, but in the foreground is a sea turtle, which all sea turtles are endangered, and I think there's probably no better expert than Larry Crowder, who's on your faculty, at explaining the impact that this has had on sea turtles. There have been some efforts, something called circle hooks, that's less likely to catch a turtle, but it's a huge problem. In fact, literally tens of thousands of birds, sometimes at the top, because they see the bait and try and catch it when it's being set, or the wrong species, or marine mammals. In the case of the turtle, they typically drown, because turtle can only hold its breath for about 30 minutes if it gets caught on a long line. Along with catching too many target fish, every year commercial fishing fleets discard millions of pounds of non-commercially valuable marine life. Probably you, unlike most people, have probably actually heard of the word bycatch. And here you can see what's happening with the dolphins. For whatever reason, dolphins tend to swim with, and actually a number of creatures like sunfish tend to swim with tuna for reasons that aren't totally understood. So they swim at the surface, but a lot of times they end up in the same nets. So there have been a lot of efforts to keep, as you know, with dolphin-safe tuna, some successful, some not, to keep dolphins out of the net. Hundreds of thousands of dolphins, porpoises, and small whales die. This is from a shrimp trawler. To give you an idea, the bycatch is all but the shrimp that remain in his basket. So a lot of times it's 10 to 1 how much marine life's thrown out for the one shrimp. And you can see the guy actually throwing it off the side. And of course there's turtles, and it's actually it's particularly a big problem for the shrimp industry, which in the Gulf and also in North Carolina is an issue. They've done something called turtle excluder devices. I don't know if any of you have ever heard that. Basically, it's almost like a filter, that keeps the big things out of the net. And then, of course, seabirds. And some die in nets, and others die like this one on long lines. This is actually an albatross, which are also nearly as endangered, if not more, than the sea turtles. And then some of them are lucky enough to get away, but then end up carrying the net the rest of their lives. Each year, net casualties include tens of thousands of seals and marine mammals. And then, of course, turtles are elegant swimmers. Their shells provide built-in protection from predators. For millions of years, it's been an evolutionary advantage, but the shells just slow them down when nets and hooks come through the ocean. current fishing technology could empty our oceans. So strong precautionary management is critical, and this is where your work in science and my work in policy are critical, that there's a juncture. In its fourth quarterly report that just came out, 2007, these are the fish that were being overfished regionally. So in your region, it includes vermilion snapper, red snapper, snowy grouper, tilefish, red grouper, black sea bass, gag, black grouper, speckled hine, and Warsaw grouper. And these are actually all managed in what's called the snapper grouper complex in the South Atlantic. And I'll explain that a little bit more later. NIMS hasn't even done scientific assessments on the vast majority of fish stocks, so the situation might be worse than we know. I'm going to give you just a couple profiles from around the country of species. So Atlantic cod were historically important and economically important in New England and Canada, and they've completely collapsed. As a result of uncontrolled overfishing, the catch of Atlantic cod has decreased by 89% between 1980 and 2006. And the reports are that overfishing continued in 2007. When I say this, I'm talking about catch, so it's the reported landings. It's a really, since you guys are more into the science, it's a really weak proxy for actual. So we don't know the biomass, we don't necessarily know the age makeup. So this is just in the amount of pounds. But it's not like fishing effort has decreased; it's actually become stronger during that time. So it's a pretty good proxy that if it's declined by 90%, it's a huge, huge decline in the fishery. Okay. In this region, in the South Atlantic, I don't know if some of you are divers or fishermen, but black grouper is a species that is beautiful. And grouper species got their name in large part because they congregate for spawning aggregations, and that's where they have these amazing events. If you ever go to the Bahamas, you can see where they just all thousands will get together. Unfortunately, fishermen have figured this out and often wipe them out. I think in the case of black grouper, it's declined by 82% since 1983, and is continued, overfishing again continued in 2007. And of course, bluefin tuna, which I mentioned earlier, they're magnificent. They're like the lions of the ocean. If people lived underwater, they would see. They can swim up to 45 miles an hour, weigh more than 1,000 pounds, and Barbara Block, who's out in Stanford, has actually been tagging the big ones and tracking them, and some of them cross the ocean in like a day or 2 days to feed in the Mediterranean and then come back. They're remarkable creatures. But like I said, there are so many threats to them. They've declined by 99% since 99.9% since 1950. In fact, there's a really, really small quota, and the fishermen can't even catch the quota that they have. Dr. Hogarth, who was the outgoing fisheries director, just said that it's like a nightmare. They're about to go extinct. That's how serious he took it. Yellowfin tuna, also pretty amazing. Their populations on both coasts have declined by 97%. Oh, I get to that slide since 1950. So again, these are some pretty grim pictures, but it's not just. And then summer flounder is a very controversial fishery. From Nova Scotia to Florida, they glide along the bottom of the Atlantic, bury themselves under and ambush prey. That's kind of their game. They do migrate, and you can see that they're pretty good at hiding. But all the sand in the world can't hide them from the increasing number of hooks and nets that are set on them. And they're both a commercial and a recreational fishery, but particularly recreational fishermen. So you can see it's a little bit more complicated issues. This is not my favorite graph, but the basic idea is they've been at 50% of what a healthy population should be, and they've stayed that way. And so that has impacts. But anyway, I can go more to that later. I had to testify before the council about that one recently. So the dusky shark and Atlantic sharks. Now, this is a story I'm pretty sure that this study was heavily contributed by Duke's faculty, but a recent study, in fact, a 2006 study of Atlantic sharks showed that they had basically declined, almost all of them, by 90% or more. This is a dusky shark, which declined by 99% in the last 50 years. Sharks are really in trouble around the world, really in big trouble. And but what I want to point out is it's not just about the fish, and the dusky shark's a pretty powerful story because, in fact, the Science article showed that the loss of the dusky shark had catastrophic impacts on the shellfish industry and ruined the shellfish industry in North Carolina. And the way it did that is that the dusky sharks, their biggest prey are other elasmobranchs branches, like in particular cow-nosed ray. If any of you are out there, you've probably seen that the cow-nosed ray populations have exploded, and cow-nosed ray feed on the scallops. So it was a fairly clear case of how overfishing has ecosystem impacts that can be really destructive. Again, it's the scientists who are able to clarify that. Often it's very difficult to find a clear impact. Of course, the ocean's so interconnected, anything gone is going to have impacts. This is another example. The Hawaiian monk seal is actually the most endangered mammal in U.S. waters. In fact, at this point, there are 1,300 individuals due to historic overfishing, and a lot of them get caught in nets and hooks, accidentally caught. And now there's such a small population, I talked to the fisheries manager from there, that their biggest problem is they have a good juvenile year class, and then they get diseases, and it's such a small and sort of, at this point, interbred, it's like cheetahs, that they're very susceptible, to, like any small population. Okay. So the U.S. fishing problems began in the mid-1950s, a lot of collapse of key stocks like cod, and this in red snapper is something in your area and in the Gulf in the 80s and 90s, where sometimes they would think they'd get better, but then they'd up the fishing quotas and then they'd get even worse. After as a result of decades of mismanagement, some fisheries are really near collapse and others are headed that direction. So we really need to make a change. But there's good news. End of 2006, early 2007, President Bush signed into law a law which had been passed by unanimous consent in Congress. They reauthorized the Magnuson-Stevens Act, which is I'll get into later, but they passed a new law that, if it's effectively implemented, could end overfishing and do a ton to restore our oceans. And it's a bipartisan issue. It's something that actually, you have more trouble get sport fishermen and recreational fishermen and commercial fishermen to agree than you do Democrats and Republicans. It's something most people really, they just get and they care about. U.S. EEZ, when we're talking about federal fisheries, we're talking mostly 300 to 200 miles out. The first law, the Magnuson-Stevens Act, was basically done to exclude foreign fishing. The idea was to exclude foreign fishing fleets from U.S. waters. And the idea wasn't that they're overfishing, it was just we wanted the economic value for our fishermen. So the law excluded foreign fleets and actually subsidized building up the U.S. industry, getting bigger boats, and the idea that there was endless fish in the ocean. And the U.S. fishery management follows this. Basically what the government did is they set up 8 regional councils. So it's not like the Forestry Service, where the Forest Service manages the forest. There's the National Marine Fisheries Service, but there's actually 8 regional councils made up almost solely of fishermen who actually determine a lot of how fish are caught. And of course there's review. So the Fisheries Service is the federal agency who's responsible for overseeing the whole process, and that's who I would hope that you'll get involved in targeting and getting them to do the right thing. But then here are the 8 regional councils. You're with the South Atlantic Council. I'll just point out that there's, from a policy perspective, there's a history to the agency somewhere is put. So, for example, the Forest Service is in agriculture, so it shouldn't be shocking that sometimes it's treated as tree farms. In the same case, the fishery councils and the Fishery Service are under the Department of Commerce. The idea was they were a money-making venture, and that's really changed over time. Okay, so the main thing, and this is, I think, the most important thing if I tell you anything tonight, is that this new law made a huge change in how fisheries are managed. And the main thing that it did is it said what had been advisory scientific committees now have a binding decision about catch limits. They don't decide what it is, but they set the ceiling. They on scientific basis, you can't catch more than this amount of fish, is basically what I'm saying. And so there's a complex process that's done. But you, as students who do science or faculty, have a real opportunity to shape this process, because now the scientific committees are tasked with really setting a maximum limit. The law also said, and this is critical, that overfishing has to end in all U.S. stocks, all U.S. waters, every fish by 2011. It's a pretty bold statement by President Bush in Congress. And it's a clear deadline. And so this is something where we're really enlisted to make that happen. Okay. And then the regulation that deals with that is National Standard 1, which is the overfishing standard. Get more of that into a second. So they're actually putting together a proposed regulation. So you have the law, but then the regulation actually implements the law. So in other words, what are the rules? What are the procedures? How do you actually end overfishing by 2011? That's being decided. That's having public input. And that's what the postcards are about. That's what the action alerts, that's what I'm asking for your help with, is on that. And then there's NEPA. How many of you have heard of NEPA before? Okay, so this is a totally different audience than normal. All right. So you know there are attacks on NEPA typically with forests and other cases. There's a new streamlining effort for NEPA because the councils do a sort of review process, and then the Fisheries Service does NEPA, and they feel like it's duplicate. So again, there's another rulemaking, and we want to make sure to fight this one off. I mean, Pombo attacked it. There have been other attempts to weaken NEPA. But NEPA, the value of it from a scientific perspective, again, it brings in science, but these fishery management decisions are about single fish typically. What's sustainable for one fish. But with the dusky shark and other things, you realize what the NEPA does is it looks at the impact of gear, what's the bottom trawlers doing in the ocean, what's it doing to other species, and so I think it's through NEPA that you have most of your turtle excluder devices and other things. So both are really important. Okay. So, I'm almost done. These are the campaign postcards that I hope you'll sign, and I hope you guys will take a lot and get other people to sign. It would be a huge help for us. We plan to get hundreds of thousands of comments around the country. We're actually, I think, going to get the record for a number of comments on any ocean issue. We're well set, and we really need your help to achieve that. And then we're going to, I think, do a boatload of comments, like literally drive a boat up to the Fisheries Service full of comments. That'd be interesting. This is and I should say that with the catch limits, I think they're going to do a very good rule. So we really more need to give them backup for doing the right thing. And with NEPA, it could be bad. So it's kind of a weird situation for us. I also have an online alert that I put together focusing on Atlantic sharks and the dusky shark, so I can give you the website. I've also put together if I had internet, I would show you. But I worked with an international group of volunteers, and we created a game, Overfishing game. So if you can sign in, I'll email everyone who signs in the game. And basically, you're a bluefin tuna trying to avoid more and more longliners and bottom trawlers, and the scores are from around the world, so people can keep anyway. So, and then it has a petition associated with it. So, and then I have the booklets which I've given you. Those are a lot more detailed. The ones I'm giving you are we're about to do a reprint. I had to update them. They're not updated to the end of 2007. So there are a few statistics that are a little dated. Mainly 7 species have dropped off the overfishing list, which is a good thing. But anyway, I can certainly email you the PDF of it when we get it updated. And then we do lots of events around the country that we'd love to have your help with. If you can postcard on campus, if there's a concert, if there's events. I know it's some of the other universities I've done, like the AFS chapter or the local group will just put out like a table in the student commons or whatever. And my hope was that we could get from all the groups here, students here, about 300 postcards signed. That would be my hope. And then, of course, we give presentations to other people, so classes and groups around the country. So if there's someone else you can think of that you think might be interested, let me know. And then, of course, we're credit photographers from around the country and the world who helped me put this together. So, I'm happy to give credits or explain where any of them come from at the end. That's it. I want to take time to answer any questions. I hope I didn't take too long. Looks okay. So, thanks.